Violence broke out Monday night throughout Venezuela following Sunday's April 14 presidential election, in which Hugo Chávez's chosen successor, Nicolás Maduro, won the presidential election with 50.7% of the vote, 1.6 percentage points ahead of the opposition candidate Enrique Capriles. The violence that took place the day after the election resulted in 8 deaths, over 60 persons injured, and dozens of burnt offices belonging to government institutions and to the governing party, the PSUV. According to the government, all of the deaths and almost all of the injured were of Maduro supporters, mostly because they were caught in the middle of the storming and burning of government and governing party offices. In one case, though, the father of one of the deceased victims told the New York Times that his son was actually a Capriles supporter. The violence appeared to be a direct consequence of Capriles' call for public demonstrations throughout the country to demand an audit of all ballot boxes. Instead of a concession speech Sunday night, Capriles had taken to the airwaves to denounce the government as being illegitimate, with the argument that he believed that he had received more votes than Maduro did. To bolster this claim, Capriles waved a bundle of papers in the air, saying that they represented 3,200 cases of election irregularities. The next day, on Monday, Capriles repeated this claim, this time explaining what types of irregularities he was referring to. Among the irregularity claims were voting officials accompanying voters to the polling booth, the expulsion of opposition witnesses from audit procedures, damaged voting machines, and campaigning immediately outside of voting centers. However, as opposition blogger Francisco Toro of Caracas Chronicles pointed out, Capriles is, quote, calling for a recount of all paper ballots. But if there was reason to believe that a 100% recount would show that he had won more votes on the day, he would have evidence for that. So far, the evidence has been forthcoming only in tiny fragments that seem tangential to his central case. I cannot believe that if the commando had systematic evidence of audit tallies that failed to match the machine tallies, they would have forgotten to show it by now. In the instances where Capriles did try to demonstrate a supposedly fraudulent vote count, and not just accusations of undue influence in the run-up to the vote, were cases where Maduro had supposedly won several times more votes than Chávez had in October of last year. However, a review of the relevant publicly available information shows that Capriles was comparing early partial results of 2012 with complete vote counts from 2013. When the complete vote counts of the two elections are compared, the results show no meaningful discrepancy. Despite this lack of any solid evidence of fraud in the counting of the votes, Capriles nonetheless is insisting on an audit of all ballot boxes. In Venezuela, voters cast both electronic and paper ballots. At the end of the vote, the electronic ballots are tallied electronically, and a little over half the paper ballot boxes, 54%, are randomly selected to be opened and compared with the results of that center's electronic count. The odds that an examination of the remaining 46% of unopened ballot boxes might show vote count irregularities is on the order of billions to one. Despite this low probability, President Maduro said on Wednesday that he had no problem with such an additional audit of the count. The reason the National Electoral Council had not yet initiated an evaluation of whether to audit remaining ballot boxes as of Wednesday was because Capriles had not yet filed a formal complaint to the Council for it to consider such a new audit. Council President Tibisay Lucena said that the Council would not conduct such an audit merely because the opposition was demonstrating in front of its offices for one.
La verificación ciudadana que se hace con los comprobantes del voto se lleva a cabo con una proporción estadística que en cualquier lugar del mundo se considera excesiva. El 54% de las cajas de resguardo fue auditado, pero también se llevaron a cabo 14 auditorías antes y durante el proceso, por lo que si hubiese algún elemento que para cualquiera de las partes deba ser impugnado, allí están las vías legales para hacerlo. No será el acoso, la amenaza o el amedrentamiento la vía para recurrir los actos del poder electoral.
When the Capriles campaign submitted its formal request on Wednesday, Lucena said that the Council would rule on the request as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, election observers, such as those from the regional country groupings Mercosur and UNASUR, have issued statements in which they praised Sunday's electoral process. Also, the Organization of American States and practically all countries in the Western Hemisphere, with the prominent exception of the United States, have recognized the new Venezuelan president. Even the Electoral Council director, who was nominated by the opposition, Vicente Diaz, publicly stated on Monday that he has no doubt that the official election result is legitimate.
Yo no tengo dudas en este momento del resultado que haya arrojado el sistema de votación, porque efectivamente ha sido auditado, certificado, revisado, hubo presencia de los testigos, todas estas cosas, pero yo creo que es importante darle una tranquilidad a aquellas personas que desde el lado opositor tienen dudas.
In effect, by refusing to recognize and accept the result, Capriles is tapping into the more radical and hardline opposition faction, which could never abide by the Chavez presidency, and which was responsible for organizing the April 2002 coup attempt, the 2-month shutdown of the oil industry in December of 2002, the violent street protests and blockades of early 2004, and the boycott of the 2005 National Assembly elections. However, since the opposition's participation in the 2006 presidential election, which it lost to Chavez, it seemed that more moderate elements within the opposition dominated. Now, with the presidency closer within its grasp than ever in the last 14 years of the Bolivarian Revolution, the more radical elements within the opposition seem to have regained the upper hand within the fractious opposition coalition. This radicalization, though, is risky for the opposition because it could alienate more moderate supporters, just as it alienated them 10 years ago. Meanwhile, President-elect Maduro has taken a hard line against the opposition's refusal to recognize his election. In one measure, Maduro said that he would not recognize the legitimacy of any state governor, and Capriles is a governor of Miranda state, who does not recognize him as president. The practical consequence would be a withholding of federal funds from that governor's budget. In another emphatic outburst Tuesday, Maduro promised that if the opposition continues on its path of radicalization, so would the government.
Y si siguen la violencia, lo que podemos es radicalizar esta revolución. Estoy dispuesto a radicalizar esta revolución, ir a fondo, allí a las causas de la miseria, de la dependencia, de la destrucción económica.
Finally, in reaction to the violent protests on Monday, Maduro announced that all protests in front of the headquarters of the National Electoral Council in Caracas would be prohibited for the time being. Capriles, as a result, decided to cancel the protest that he had announced at the council for Wednesday. One factor that seems to be contributing to the escalation of the conflict between the government and the opposition is the position of the Obama administration, which through its refusal to recognize the election result, is emboldening the opposition by giving it powerful political cover. Given past efforts of the opposition to deny the elected Venezuelan government's legitimacy, it is doubtful that it will be any more successful this time around than it was in the tumultuous years of 2002 and 2004. The main difference between that period and today is, first, this time around the Bolivarian Revolution cannot count on its charismatic leader, Hugo Chavez, to guide it through the turbulence, and second, the closeness of last Sunday's presidential election makes the Bolivarian government more vulnerable than it was when it had won elections by margins of 20 points or more. Greg Wilpert reporting for the Real News Network.